Welcome back, everyone, to part two of our NHL Draft ranking show. Part one, we look into players from rank, player rank from 17 to 32. And in this episode today, we're going to look at players ranked from 16 to 1. Just a reminder, you can get our black book at hockeyprospect.com. You can get the print version on Amazon. This is what the print version looks like. And thank you for everyone who has purchased our book since last Monday. We really appreciate all the good feedbacks we've received. And Brad, let's get going with number 16, Michael Brandsegg-Nygard.
Yeah, so Brandsegg-Nygard, one of the older players in this class, but also a player with one more impressive curves. Honestly, drove us a little crazy at the start of the season because so toolsy, great hands, very dynamic. He just pops out immediately when you watch him on the ice. Yet, really difficult evaluation for us because his playmaking rates weren't very good. He wasn't. It's kind of like what we talked about earlier when we were saying how JJ Peterka, the reference how his playmaking is in his draft eligible season wasn't great, and then he turned a corner. Well, Brandsegg-Nygard kind of did that, but he actually did in his draft season. So, yeah, the lateral playmaking rates weren't there. The timing when it came to 3-on-2 or 2-on-1 situational setups weren't there, and he was playing in a vacuum too often. However, fast forward to the second half of the season, towards the Allsvenskan playoffs and towards the World Championships, and then you saw a player who started distributing the puck more effectively. And don't get me wrong, he's not a dynamic playmaker, but it was much more efficient, and that's what he has to do. And then when you look at him off the puck, he started understanding how to play in a structure to put himself in positions in soft ice so he can get that beautiful shot off. And that's really the hallmark of his game. One of the best windmills in this class, or sorry, windmills, one of the best wheelhouses in this class, and he does have a beautiful one timer that has a windmill setup. I guess maybe that's why I'm trying to say that. But yeah, one of the best wheelhouses in this class. So he can set up on the flank during a power play. He can come back through the backdoor options, sneak past coverage, one time everything. He has a soft catch and release. Again, one of the more dexterous set of hands in this class. Handling wise, he actually reminds me a little bit of Beckett Sennecke. He's not as tall and he's not as quite as creative, but in terms of like the dynamism and mixing the agility with his handling and coming in and operating on different planes of the ice and attacking on different angles. He's very gifted at that. It makes him very difficult to contain in the corners, and he's athletically gifted. One of our dynamic athletes in general. So you take the handling combination with his skating base, and it makes him very difficult to contain. He can, when plays are dead, he can basically bring them back to life, and that's a very useful quality because he's not so much a line driver. He's more of a complement, but then there are aspects to his game that allow him to drive possession in certain areas occasionally. One of those being the corners, as I mentioned, but the other is in transition. This is a player whose skating base allows him to be very dangerous in transition. He's a fluid, very good skater. I would argue he's a bit underrated with his skating. I've seen a lot of people discuss his skating as like not a great trait of his. I would disagree with that. Athletically, he's very gifted, so he gets off the center line at a good rate. His launch fluidity is what we usually use to describe the term, is where is a player with a lot of peak power output. When they get off their center line, they can explode off of it while still maintaining balance. And it basically functions. There's three-step area quickness, even if it's just a result of them turning. And he's very, very gifted at that. And there's more there for him to grow into. Yes, he's older, and yes, the kid's a thoroughbred. The kid's built like a horse, right? Like the kid's a beast. But when you look at his lower half, I really think there's a lot more development there. So really interesting player, solid, athletically gifted, one of the highest floors in the draft. He's tenacious. He's competitive. He'll get in players' faces after whistles. The body language is very good. He doesn't back down. I thought he was exceptional at the World Championships in some of our viewings. And he has some of the best shot quality in this class. So he can beat you straight from the blue line and right to the net area. And that's is pretty rare. In this draft class specifically, there's not a ton of high-end shooters. And so for Brandsegg-Nygard, it's one of those situations where it really stands out because he is one. And when it comes to safety, I mean, we have him 16th. I really don't think we get him at 16th. Like he's probably gone because it's just in a draft where there's a lot of variables you have to take into consideration and there's a lot of unknowns, he falls in that category where you're guaranteed basically a top nine power forward that can snipe pucks and do a lot of good things. And they don't grow on trees. Everybody wants one. So it's one of those situations where if a team's uncomfortable with what they're seeing in terms of, like, let's just say theoretically in the steer range, Carter Yakemchuk or Jett Luchanko or Berkly Catton, or there's all sorts of variables you got to take into consideration with some of these kids. With him, you don't. You know what you're getting. It's already there. And you just have to let him continue to grow into his body and get more explosive. What did you see from Jérôme?
Yeah, well, I think what you said is pretty bang on. Like, I agree with everything you said. You know, I remember like I got a question on Twitter like a few weeks ago, and the question was like, what are you seeing out of Beckett Sennecke compared to him, and why is this guy not ranked ahead of Sennecke? And the easy answer to this is one guy is super raw, is only scratching the surface of his talent, and you have Brandsegg-Nygard, who is not a finished product, but he's a lot more advanced than a guy like Sennecke as far as like physically. He's one of the more advanced, physically mature player in this draft class. I don't think he's far off playing in the NHL. I think one year in Sweden, and I think you could see him like make a challenge for an NHL roster spot like in 1 year. I think. So I think you're getting a really safe pick. One of the safest pick of any player in this draft class. You're going to get a guy who's going to give you 20 goals, at least 40, 45 points. Just the shooting ability that he has is, he can be a weapon on the power play, on the half wall. So there's a lot to like here. Just, there's not, the only thing I would say is maybe the playmaking, but it got better in the second half of the season. He was really good in the playoff, in the Swedish second pro league. Next season, he's going to play in the SHL on a good team. So there's a lot of good things going on with that prospect. So like you said, he's 16. I wouldn't be shocked if a team picks him 10, 11, 12. Really safe. They know what they're getting with him. And hey, NHL scout, if you can get like, if they don't want any surprise, right, when they draft a player, and there's zero surprise with that player. Everyone who scouted him this year knows what they're getting, and so I think that's the reason why you could see him go a bit higher than where we have him at 16. Moving on to number 15, and speaking of the total opposite as far as no surprise, Liam Greentree is a player that we have 15, had a great year with Windsor in the OHL, played on a bad team, captain of the team at 17, super talented. But sometimes you don't know what you're getting with Greentree. I'll give you a good example. I was in Ottawa for obviously an OHL game, and I remember Mark was telling me to watch this guy, and I think he was hyping him to me, and so I go to Ottawa, and the first two periods he's just freaking awful. No compete, doesn't show any skill whatsoever, like just really bad. And I was like, oh, another overrated OHLer. And then the third period happened, and he's incredible. I think he had 4 points in the third period. He made some unbelievable skill play with the puck. His playmaking was fabulous. And I was like, yeah, that's Liam Greentree. If you can take one game to show you the best of one player and the worst of one player, I got it in that game in Ottawa. So that's the thing with him. Like talent wise, this is a guy that you can make a case. He's a top 5 talent player in this draft class. Um, he's got size, but he doesn't really play like a true, like he's what, 6'2.5", 215. He's listed at the combine. Like that's great size. But if you don't play with that size, you play more like you're 5'11", 175. I mean, it doesn't do you any good to be that big. Um, so that's one thing he's gonna have to improve. Play, a tougher physical game. The compete is gonna have to be better. But man, he's so talented that maybe in 5 years he goes. Maybe let's say he goes 15 overall in the draft. Maybe in 5 years that's gonna look like a steal. But as we often mention, like there's always risk, and we have to take into consideration the risk of some players, and Greentree is one of them. There's some risk, but also the skating is also it used to be a huge concern. I think let's say last year was a huge concern for me. Made some really good improvement this year, but it's still not a fantastic skater. He's going to be fine, but he still has to work on it every year, trying to bring his skating to another level. But yeah, very. I don't want to say he's a boom bust type guy, but you could. I think it's fair. Maybe it's fair to say he's a boom bust, but I think his play away from the puck has got better enough, and the compete is not like the compete is bad. Like it's fine, but he's not Cole Boldoin, he's not Nathan Villeneuve, he's not Igor Surin compete wise, but obviously they're not Liam Greentree skill wise. So there's a bit of a pick, pick your poison basically. So Greentree is definitely an interesting guy. I'm curious to see where he goes in the draft. Skill wise, and I mentioned like his skill level is really high. He also played on a really bad team in Windsor with not much help around him. So I mean, we always joke was like, imagine him playing for the London Knights this year. Like, what is draft stock right now if he play for the London Knights? And it's like, yeah, but yeah, it's a good thing, also a bad thing, because we don't know. Not every players can play in the perfect situation in their draft year. Some guys are going to be more challenged. Some other guys it's going to be a lot more easier for them. And Greentree Craze, I mean, could have not played in the worst situation basically. And unfortunately, at the U18, he didn't really get a lot of ice time. I think maybe the skating on the big ice was an issue, maybe for the coaching staff. And also defensively, he's not, Mister compete defensively. He's not like your typical terrific two-way player. But he still has time to improve. Brad, what was your take on Greentree this year? Because I know you and I have had a lot of discussion about him, and it was very up and down this year. I think for you and I on Greentree.
Well, you mentioned risk. We talked about LA's draft earlier as an example of like how teams assess risk on a draft floor and try to draft around it, right? So you had the Turcotte, Bjorn fought, and then they draft Kaliev, go for the home run swing because they thought their draft was solidified, right? Which is how you do it. In the case of Greentree, what makes him so fascinating is that he's going to get drafted in the first round, but he presents arguably some of the most risk out of any player available, which means that the team that drafts him, if you're listening to this and your team ends up drafting him, look for the draft strategy that the team incorporates after they pick him. I bet you they're going to look for a lot more high floor, lower ceiling players that are safer and that they're more comfortable with, right? As a result of it. So he's one of those very unique wild cards when it comes to watching how a team tries to orchestrate their draft around a pick like him. He is a triple threat. Jérôme mentioned unbelievable talent, one of the most talented players in this draft. He is arguably the most talented player on his backhand in this entire class. He has to be because he is obsessed with being on his backhand. It's true of Paul. So typically what we want to see is you want to see a player show the intelligence and efficiency on their forehand where they only are on their backhand if it makes sense for them to be on their backhand, because it takes more coordination and it takes more skill in order to actually be more successful when they operate on their backhand. In Greentree's case, he's so gifted on his backhand, he's so validated by doing it. He never just seems to ever want to be efficient or ever operate on his forehand, even when he should. Another aspect of this player is like he makes life difficult for himself. Does not simplify his game. He makes things overly complicated. He skates himself into dead areas. Then he has to be reliant on his handling and skating combination, try to get him out of trouble. And the funny thing, I remember I had a conversation with Mark about him. Mark was like, "Any improvements with how he operates?" And I was like, honestly, there's no improvements how he operates, but he just made like a three-layered backhand pass through. It was just to the tape. It was perfect. And it's like, I guess he's one of those anomalies where it doesn't have to be that intelligent because he can operate the way he does successfully. He's just that talented. So unbelievably unique player, because when you see him on paper, the first thought process is, oh, he's a power forward. No, he's not. He's not a power forward. Doesn't know how to use his frame. He shrinks. He plays like he's 5'8". He doesn't know how to overwhelm players. He's not like he plays nothing like Brandsegg-Nygard or Chernyshov. However, he could end up better than both of them. He's more dynamic than both of them. He's a true triple threat. He could be a blue chip prospect if things go correct. So it's just one of those situations too. And admittedly, this is a player where I have him a bit further back than where we had him in our final ranking, but I have to sit here and be like, almost 100-point player who's doing everything wrong in a terrible system. What happens when you streamline? What happens when you put him in a better system, right? So those are the questions you got to ask yourself about a player like this. But he's one for me where just in terms of like finesse-oriented, hyper-skilled forward that could has all the boom potential in the world. He's the one where it's going to be the most fascinating to watch his development curve over the next 4 to 5 seasons. See what happens with him. He's going to be one. I bet you if he does bomb out, he'll be one of those gold standards for the industry that we bring him up all the time when comparing him to other very talented forwards that have like a lower compete game, not so good to 100-foot game, not a great skater. Pace of play is overwhelming at times for him. He fits that mold. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens to him long term.
Yeah, it's pretty funny that he's Greentree is 15 and the guy we have 14, Yakemchuk, is almost like Liam Greentree of they're both very similar as far as like pure upside, but also could bust also. So Yakemchuk from Calgary, WHL, big right-handed defenseman, 6'2", over 200 pounds. Super talented for a big man like him. Unbelievable shot. Really good hands. Physical, at time nasty in his own zone. So you might ask, why is he 14 on your list? Like, why are you not a fan of a 6'2", 6'3", nasty defenseman who can really shoot the puck, score 30 goals this year? It's like, what's wrong? Well, I think we have some question mark about his hockey sense for us. It's average at best. Sometimes we're wondering, like, what is he doing on the ice? He gets away with it in junior because he's better than everyone on the ice. So he gets away with it a lot in junior, but it ain't gonna happen at the NHL level. Defending, so he's almost like the opposite of Zayne Parekh, where Zayne Parekh is really good against the rush. Like his rush defense is really good, and then he gets in trouble, down low in front of his own net. Yakemchuk is the opposite. Really good in his own zone. Very physical, clears the front of the net, wins his battle along the boards. But his rush defense is very, I don't know, is average the right word, or maybe even below average? Because the skating is very um, a problem. His lateral agility, his ability to gap is not good enough, I think. And if we've seen him rank top 5, top 10, and it's in our opinion, if you're gonna draft a defenseman top 5, top 10, you're thinking he's a first pairing defenseman. We can't rank Yakemchuk in that range because we don't think he's a first pairing defenseman. Because first pairing defensemen, they play against Kucherov, they play against Mackinnon, they play against McDavid, Draisaitl, Austin Matthews. We just see Yakemchuk, and we really have some major question, like how is he going to defend against the top offensive player in the league? Mostly the really fast player. So we're talking about, you can put Braden Point in there. You can obviously McDavid, McKinnon. I mean, every defenseman in the league struggles against those guys, but you want to at least have a chance to defend against those guys. And we really think it's going to be really hard for Yakemchuk. Not only does the skating is a concern for us, I think the reads, the anticipation is not on point for us. So that's why he's a bit lower on our list. But the talent is, he's a terrific talent with the puck on his stick. He can do some really good things. Usually 6'3", 210-pound defensemen don't usually do what he does on the ice. So I get why some people can get excited about him, but to us, the defending and the lack of skating is, we put a bit more focus on that, and that's why he's a bit, he's 14 and not 5 on our list. Brad, I know you and I have talked about this player all year, just scratching our head about ranking him, which is probably the hardest ranking we had. Like the hardest player to rank this year was probably Yakemchuk.
Yeah, between Yakemchuk, Greentree, and Catton, I can't wait for this draft to be over. We've had enough. It's been a very difficult process for sure. Yeah, Carter Yakemchuk is, the big thing that Jérôme mentioned is skating. So when you look at skating bases with defensemen, you're looking at the multi-directional skating, the small area skating, and the turn rate, right? So not a great athlete, so turn rate's not really there. Backward skating is limited. His C cuts, therefore, also limited when he's caught in the neutral zone and he has to aggressively C cut and try to close. He can't do it very well. And when he has to suddenly pivot and rotate and try to recover, he's very susceptible. And that does not project a change. And this goes back to skating mechanics when it comes to the physiology or the physical makeup of a player, right? So, but we could sit here and we say, well, skating's not very good, and his retrieval rates aren't very good, and he's a selfish player, and he is, and he doesn't make his teammates better, which is kind of hard to do for a defenseman, but it's true. But the truth is, it's one of the most gifted handling shooting combinations we've seen in ages from the back end. Like this kid's shooting quality, ability to penetrate from the back end and just find space and get a shot off through traffic is second to none. His handling is incredible. He's an incredibly talented player. And so, yes, there's a lot of issues and a lot of variables you have to take into consideration. But there's very possible he ends up on a second pairing top power play unit and becomes a very good functional player, which I think is exactly what's reflected in our ranking. It's just there is way more variables you have to take into consideration relative to some of these other top defensemen, and that's why he's further back.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned his talent, but him on the power play it's almost hilarious to watch him play on the power play because, I mean, he's there to shoot the puck. He's basically if Ovechkin was a defenseman. So like if he gets the puck, he's gonna shoot it, and very slim chance he's gonna pass it back. He's gonna try everything he can to get his shot through. It's something I'd like to see is more playmaking out of him on the power play, like more being a play creator. He was mostly just I get the puck, I shoot it, and that's what I do. I'm gonna find a shooting angles to get my puck on net. Like it's mostly what he does on the power play from the point or from the half wall. I would have liked to see more, creative passing play from him. So I didn't really get to see that this year. So interesting guy to watch on draft day where he goes. Number 13 on the list, we go to Finland with Konsta Helenius. Super smart center. I think we have him and Luchanko back to back, and it's been a very good debate that we had all year between all year, mostly in the second half of the season, who we like better. So Helenius, again, smart player, very good defensively. The some games you watch him, you think that's a future Selke winner. In some of his high peak performance, like in the Liga playoff, there were some games where he was incredible defensively. I think when we look at again, I'm going to compare him to Luchanko. Luchanko younger than him, so he gets maybe an advantage there. The skating, big plus for Luchanko compared to Helenius. Playmaking, I think both are pretty good playmaking, so I wouldn't give too much of an edge here to one of those two. Helenius, really strong physical player. Like he's 5'11", but he played well in the Liga this year. Like play well. That's a bit. I could say he played really well in the Liga this year. I think one point I want to make is if you watch. I know people at home don't really watch the Liga. Like, the average hockey fan don't really have time for that. But if you watch him in the Liga and you watch him where most people saw him is international games, there's a huge difference. It's really not the same for whatever reason. Like the performance were night and day basically from what we saw in the Liga compared to international hockey, whether it's the U18, U20, World Championship. Not sure why. It happens some year where a top prospect just doesn't play well internationally, and that's why you need to watch those. Is that player in his league? You get a better, clearer picture of the player. So yeah, Helenius, I think we see him I mentioned like in one of my quotes in the book was he's a bit of a Nico Hischier. I don't know if he's going to be as good as Nico Hischier, but solid two-way player. Coach will love him. He's got some work to do. Maybe Brad, you can talk about this, but I know like we talk about his shot, maybe improving his shot. Improving, maybe changing more the angle on the shot. That's one part of his game. Obviously, the skating for his size, it's fine, but it could be better.
Yeah, for sure. You just took the words out of my mouth. Like the reason we have him a bit low, maybe relative to what some people would expect, given that we love intelligent 200-foot centers, which he is. And he was phenomenal in the Liga playoffs. Like he was an animal. He was cross-checking players. He was trying to fight people after whistles. He was intense, and he was just doing everything right. I thought he was fantastic. But you look at his open ice skating. That's a weakness, especially when you factor in his size. As Jérôme mentioned, Luchanko way ahead in that regard. Though he makes up for it. He's agile. His edge work is very good. He's crafty. He's nifty. He's hard to contain. He's slippery. But the shooting mechanics specifically are the real issue. Like his snapshot is fine, and he has to be over reliant on it because, quite simply, his handling doesn't transfer into his wrist shot. He can't suddenly laterally drag a puck through a defenseman's triangle, a defenseman's base, and redirect or change the shooting angle. Can't suddenly shift the shooting angle using his hands. So that makes it much easier for a goalie to pick up on the trajectory of the shot. So will he score goals? Of course he will. It won't be through dynamically rushing the puck and in transitional attack, and coming through the circles and then flying through the circles and then setting up a shot through a triangle and blowing it past the goalie. It's not going to be like that. But he's smart, so he obviously is going to be able to get into high traffic areas, slip through coverage, find soft spots, and pull something off. He also has an okay one timer, and he projects to be a 15, 20 goal guy in his prime, but it's all about the playmaking. Is why you draft him. He sees it at option in advance, very good at recognizing where his teammates are attempting to position themselves in advance. So that way he kind of has eyes in the back of his head where he can spin off pressure. He can take pressure that's coming on backwards to him, but then know where his teammates are attempting to actually skate. So that really gives him an advantage. It's very hard to find 200-foot, hyper-intelligent, mature defensive-oriented centers that have some gifts, and he is that. I really thought, honestly, going into the season, he would be a top 10 player for us. So I'd argue he's had a bit of a disappointing year, if all things, especially when you factor in his international play, which was downright bad, I would argue, relative to his legal play. Like the U20s, we don't have any confirmation of this. But I will be very surprised if he was not either injured or if there was something else affecting him, because he's just not the same player. And then the U18s, I think he was okay, but it showed the finishing rates, right? He just can't finish. He must have a teammate like Emil Hemming obviously did it for him, the U18s, but this is a player that needs line mates that can help him finish and execute. Because he's just, again, not the most gifted goal scorer. So, yeah, I think probably 55 point version of Nico Hischier. Still a very useful player. And to Jerome's point, because of his maturity level in Liga, that means he's probably ready for the show sooner rather than later. It's just all about if the open ice skating can catch up and really take off in the next year or two. I think that will really help accelerate his development.
Yeah, so if we keep going on, we just mentioned him, but Jett Luchanko is our 12th ranked player. So third back-to-back, we had some really good discussion about both players in the last three, four last month. Very smart player, one of the smartest player in the whole draft. Terrific skater. So high compete. So there's a lot to like her. Not a gifted, shooter or scorer, but I think the playmaking is so good that we think he's gonna be able to produce as much offense as Helenius, I think. I think offensively they're gonna be probably around the same production, I think. Luchanko, so he's younger. He's one of the younger player in the whole draft. I think he's a late August birthday. So that is a big plus for us. You look at how he played this year in the OHL with Guelph. Guelph, not a good team. So he didn't really have a lots of help around him. But he still played well. So I think with him, you're looking at a very strong playmaker, very strong defensive game, good on face-off. You look at the work he did at the U18 in the final. Again, he was matched up against James Higgins in the final, and he did really well. He shut him down for the most part. So that was really impressive. So yeah, like we often talk about hockey sense and competing are two, more important category that we look for players. He gets really high end grade for both, for the compete in the hockey sense. The skating is also very high for us. So there's a lot to like here. And we think he was quite underrated this year. Like not many lists had him as a first round pick this year. He's been in our first round since I believe November. And he kept with every list he just kept moving up. The only thing I would say is, he's a 5'11" center. Well, I think he's got enough pushback. I think he started the year at the 165 pound. Now he's almost at 190. So obviously the 165 pound was probably not really the real, you know, data at the beginning of the year. But he's now up to 187 pounds, which is, it's pretty good for 17 years old. He's only turning 18, like I said, late August. So more and more, I don't think the size will be an issue for him. Um, I'm a huge fan. I don't know about you, Brad, but I'm a huge fan, and didn't start that way. I remember Mark told me, watch this kid, and in the first two games I watched, I was like, I don't know what I don't know what you're saying, Mark, but that's scouting. Keep watching, and the more I watch, the more I figure the player out. So I know you were a big fan of Luchanko, Brad.
Yeah, he's a bit streamlined. He's not as dynamic as some of these other players we're talking about. Like when you compare him to Liam Greentree, for instance, he's just not as dynamic. His handling speed is not at the same as Helenius, for instance. But it doesn't have to be because he's such a gifted skater. The more gifted you are as a skater, the more you can streamline your game in some instances because it's just so hard for a defenseman to be able to calibrate to the forward who's fast, right? So that's it. Luchanko's hands are fine and he's incredibly crafty and deceptive still, and he's a very intelligent player. It's just if we took a highlight reel and you saw his goals and primary assists, a lot of you would be like, "Oh, really? This high?" Right? And that's fair. But that again, there's so much more to this player, and that's because he's so defensively aware. And again, the open ice area skating is such an important aspect of being able to play the center position, so you can transition effectively with and without the puck. And he has that. One thing that surprised me actually about this player is that coming into the combine, we're not very big. He's younger. It's like I wonder how he's going to test. He tested amazingly well. He's a way better athlete than I knew. That really helps. I feel solidify our opinion that there's more there too. So when you look at like growth rate of the centers, I really feel he's the one here in the top 20 that makes the most sense to improve a great deal relative to what was seen this past season. There's a tremendous amount of untapped potential in this player, and I think he's just getting started. It's one of those things where, admittedly, if you were to just like put him on the ice right now, is he really 13th or 14th? Honestly, probably not. He's a little bit further back. But the way that we look at him when you project him outward in 5 years when taking in the growth rate, that's why we have him right this high. Sometimes you have to bet on growth rate. And it's tricky. That's the most difficult aspect of scouting. And that's what we're doing with Jett Luchanko.
Yeah. Berkly Catton, number 11 on our list from the WHL, had a fantastic season with Spokane, 50 plus goal, 115 points. So we have him at 11. So people might wondering why, why is he not higher? Maybe Brad, you can start, and I'll finish on this one. But he's been a player that we have really struggled this year with because we see the stats. We're not dumb, but we don't scout the stats. We scout the player. And a lot of times this year, you might get 2 points, 3 points in one game, and then it's like, I don't think he played a good game. Sometimes his passing efficiency was really bad. You can argue his teammates were not good, and that's a fair point. He didn't play on a good team, but I think the difference, my main point about him, why I didn't push for him in the top 10 was the difference between his good and bad game was like very wild to me. Like I've never seen a top 10 ranked player with such a difference between his good and his bad team. And I know people are going to say, well, his team sucked. He doesn't have good teammates. And it's like, it's fair, but like, I've seen some really good player on really, bad team, be more consistent and play better and not have like really bad passing games like I've seen from Catton. So we also don't really project him as a center. Another reason why he drops from our top 10. But incredible transition player. Really good shot. I mean, that's not even fair. A great shot. But there's some part of his game that, drives us a bit crazy, and that's why he's not top 10.
Yeah, I'd say most misunderstood player in the draft. They'd be understating it. So, publicly now you're starting to see some people actually have some pushback and start talking about some of his weaknesses. But for the majority of the season, leading right up to the last month here, like there's a lot of people who legitimately have said he's just an elite player with no weaknesses whatsoever. He's just small. And that nothing could be further from the truth. That is not what he is. It's not how he operates. He is a very unique, highly adapted, specialized player that's making it work for him, but he was also thrust into a perfect situation. I know Jérôme just mentioned, the teammates weren't great, but as scouts, so when that happens, it's true, his team wasn't great. So what do? We have to scrape that and figure out what's going on and how much of this result is production or lack of production result of his teammates relative to him. Now he put up a ton of points, right? So one thing is like it's not as if his teammates weren't capable of receiving his passing plays. So the pass reception aspect of his teammates, it was there, it was fine. Everything ran through him, and he played like 25 minutes a game. So those are two things that definitely need to be taken into consideration. The other huge factor here is this is the biggest problem with this player when it comes to his public perception. There's two things that happen. One is people are calling him best skater in this class. I've seen that now talked about multiple times. He's 5'11", a buck 180, or sorry, a buck 80. This is the thing about a player with that build is they have to be dynamic and open ice in order to have that label. You can't have a player who's his height, who's not a dynamic, unbelievable skater in open ice, and then call him a best skater. He's not Brad Lambert. He is nothing like that in terms of his skating base or mechanically. He's phenomenal with his edges. He works very similar to Noah Ostlund. The way they operate is that they're small, so they have to slip through coverage and they have to be evasive, and he is that. Right. And that's how he uses his skating. The other aspect he uses his skating is something I've talked about with Victor Arvidsson when on my radio segments during the NHL Network. I bring up Victor Arvidsson to discuss gear shifting and speed differentials. And the reason I bring that up is because that is the base of this player. This player is brilliant at understanding how to differentiate his speed relative to the defense and then expose them. So what I mean is that not a great athlete, smaller, so he's not very good at manipulating himself off the center line. So to adjust for this, he almost always is entering a glide. He's always in motion at the right times. That's a skill, and it's something he's exceptional at. So when he's receiving a pass, he's not dead stopped usually. He's in motion already, which will compensate for the lack of open ice skating, and it will compensate for the lack of being able to launch himself off the center line correctly. The other aspect of this that's very interesting about him is that he can get up to his top speed, which is not that fast. It's fine, not that fast, but he can get up to it almost instantaneously. It's like 2 strides, and he's already going at his top speed. So what this means is that when he receives a puck, he can do a couple of different things that are very unique. One is that he can get to his top speed faster than most defensemen can anticipate to it, but he can also lull defensemen into a false sense of security by staying in his glide, then exploding and shifting. Now the defenseman's trying to make up lost ground. Now they're overcompensating. They're going too quickly. They're cutting down on an angle that's not correct. So what does he do? He immediately shifts, pivots, stops up. Now the lanes are readjusted. Now he's configuring the ice. Now he's using his handling. He's manipulating the defensive triangle. He's throwing them off balance. He's finding options. That's his skill set. That's what makes him effective. It's not this dynamic elite skating machine who has no faults. It's that he has faults, but he seems to have recognized them and has created a game around compensating for them. Now, the other aspect of this player that's really fascinating is that he is actually a primary shooter. He went into the season as a primary playmaker, and now he's a primary shooter. What the heck is going on? So his playmaking is easily the most overrated aspect of him, and it is extremely similar, take it from us, it's extremely similar to Adam Fantilli. And I'm sure some of you remember this. Adam Fantilli magically had no issues. The people who were talking about him as he had no issues. He was a true number one in most draft classes. If Bedard didn't exist, he was a great playmaker. He made his teammates better. He thought the game at a high level. And the truth is that that's not what he was. Adam Fantilli was not that type of player at all. In fact, Adam Fantilli's playmaking rates suggested he might not even be a center long term. I don't know how many Columbus fans were out there, but maybe you'll agree with me. I thought he was very mixed when he was at the center position. There was a reason he was put on the wing as often as he was. And that's because when he is turning or spinning off pressure with the puck, he has a lot of difficulty with the eyes in the back of the head, quote unquote, concept, where he doesn't recognize the positioning of his teammates in advance as well as he should when he's trying to spin off the pressure and trying to find a nice lateral backhand setup through layers. He can't do that at a high rate. Neither can Berkly Catton. Berkly Catton works. Berkly Catton, in some of our viewings, has had some of the worst playmaking rates we've ever seen. Now, there is a counter to this argument to a degree, which is, well, not working with a lot, playing a ton of minutes, and he's the primary driver of play because his neutral zone entry rates are spectacular, and they project to be spectacular at the NHL level. That is true. That is true. You can also say that when you lost him in the playoffs against Prince George, his playmaking was more streamlined, and because of that, it was better. That is also true. However, if you take his full game sample, we have a huge one. We had to for this player because we see him differently than a lot of people. It paints a picture of what Jérôme talked about, where he's incredibly inconsistent. One game it's holding, the next game it's all over the map, and he's not minimizing his risk within his passing execution rates at all. He's just throwing dead pucks. He's just throwing pucks into bad areas. He's throwing pucks that create transitional play up the ice against him. So you factor that in, and it's like, okay, he is a gifted scorer, and he is going to score at the NHL level. We project him to be probably 40 plus goal scorer, but you take in the fact that he's not the most gifted playmaker. I mean, he can still make dynamic passing plays, just not at the rate people think. And then you look at his defensive game, which definitely does not suggest the center at this time. And it paints a picture of a player that's misunderstood. If now, don't get me wrong, like I'm saying all this, if he ends up at center, we're in trouble. We're in a lot of trouble. If he actually ends up at the 200-foot center, and then his open ice skating finds a full gear, and he can hold physically, and he's actually a center, guess what? We're in trouble. We're going to look back on this. We're going to laugh. So people are going to come after us. Be like, remember when you thought Berkly Catton was the winger and you had him outside the top 10? It's possible. Okay, I can't sit here and tell you it's not possible. But what he looks like right now and how we project what we've seen, and we've seen a ton, is a dynamic scoring winger who's just a completely misunderstood player. The other factor, I'll mention one other thing about this. I don't want to be too long-winded, and I'm trying to generalize these as much as I can. But with this player specifically, we probably should go into a bit more detail, is when you have a smaller forward who's using speed differentials and edge work to his advantage to manipulate opposing defensemen that are bigger than him, at the NHL level, those rates go down, which means he needs a fallback option. The smaller you are, the more you need to have an innate understanding of physicality. What I mean by that is, we use a term in the book, it's a definition I got from collegiate wrestling, which was that you have to react dynamically to resistance. Right? Some people are instinctually way better than other people at understanding how to weight transfer through another human being who's trying to impose their will on them, right? It's not one of those things that's completely teachable, even though it looks teachable. Some people are exceptionally gifted at just understanding leverage advantages relative to other people. Perfect example of this is Pavel Datsyuk. Pavel Datsyuk didn't look that strong. He didn't look that big. He wasn't Eric Lindros. He wasn't imposing. How many times did all of us see him strip pucks off players? How many times do we see him overwhelm players, dominate players? It's because he had an innate base for leverage advantages, so he could compensate for his lack of size. Berkly Catton has not shown that nearly to the degree necessary. And don't get me wrong, I'm not looking for Pavel Datsyuk. Pavel Datsyuk is a one-off. I'm looking for a player who can at least physically hold. And I'll give you an example of one that did, and one that we were high on, and one that has shown success at doing this in small areas is Nils Hoglander. Nils Hoglander knows how to take the initial phase of a cross check and then turn that into a momentum swinging play. So for instance, he gets cross checked in the back. Instead of just getting pinned to the boards, he'll take that momentum and peel off the pressure and then use that to find an option. Catton has occasionally done that, but not nearly to the degree that you would need to see. So yeah, totally misunderstood. Unbelievably misunderstood. The last time I've seen something like this was Adam Fantilli. Adam Fantilli last year, everybody goes top player besides Bedard, guaranteed number 2, no flaws, great hockey sense. None of those things were true, and it turned. I had people coming after me for talking about how we thought Leo Carlsson was a better player at the time, and Leo Carlsson was a much smarter player. Leo Carlsson projects to be the better player, and a lot of people have come around on that now. And we're going to see if it happens with Berkly Catton, but maybe it goes the other way. But either way, this player is incredibly misunderstood. I still like him. I know that sounds impossible. I still think he's a very good player. He's a dynamic scorer. and he's going to score 40 goals. We just think it's not a wing, and we think that there's some real issues here in terms of his defensive upside and his playmaking rates that will lower his ceiling. So hopefully that very long-winded rant helps clear up at least how we view him, even if you would disagree with how we evaluated it.
At number 10, we have another guy that people are going to be maybe shocked, maybe surprised, maybe they're going to yell at us. But we have Artyom Levshunov at number 10. Looks like he's going to be the number 2 pick in the draft, but we're just not there with him that high. He was not at any point this season like that high on the list. He was always in the 8, 10, 12 range for us during the year. A tough one to scout. Almost like it's almost like any game that we watched, we didn't really know what version of Levshunov we're getting. Like some games, he'd show us some good flash offensively, but overall this season, he didn't really do that. Like he was very up and down with his play at the line, his vision. It was not really. It was very inconsistent for us. Defensively, some games he showed some some good things, but a lot of times the reads were not there for us. I thought his anticipation was not there enough. Physically, I remember one game. I remember I texted Brad. I was a bit blown away by this. He started. It was a game against the U.S. national program team. I believe it was January 1st. So I think he started the game with like 4 major league, like big time hit that almost looked like the second coming of Scott Stevens. But that was like zero what we saw from him before that. Like we never seen that physicality from him. So, and it's like keep watching other games. Don't really see that style from him ever again. Here and there he's gonna throw a hit or two, but nothing really convincing for us as far as grading him with a high compete level, a high physical game. We just didn't see that. For the most part, he played more like instead of playing like Scott Stevens, he played more like a Jeff Petrie type defenseman in his own zone. There's some even Bouchard comparable who is playing his own zone with a bit too soft. The compete was not good. The read, the smart were just not there for us. But he's not in Bouchard offensively either, so he's not going to be a point per game player in the NHL. So again, very tough player to watch. And it's also very tough to, we have our opinion, but we know what's everyone else saying about this player, whether it's public list, whether it's NHL teams. There's not many teams that think there are some teams that think like us, but I think the majority of teams are more like he's maybe the top defenseman in the draft. If he's not a top defenseman, he's maybe the second best defenseman, but we have him as our 5th best defenseman. So that tells you what we really think about him. So we have to really be sure of ourselves, and maybe in 5 years this is going to look bad. And maybe in 5 years we're going to look like genius. Who knows? Obviously, like I said, I think he's going to go number two in the draft. Not sure 100% yet, but it seems to be leaning that way. Again, Brad, you and I have watched him together. We have talked way too many times about him this season. Like one of the toughest guy to scout. It's also a player we saw 2 years ago when he was in Belarus. We watched, I think it was by accident. We were watching another player, and we saw this kid almost looking like the Kill Makar of Belarus. He was unbelievable with that Belarus U18 team that those games that we watch. And he's been good. He was good in the USHL last year, but maybe not the level I think we expected him to be. And this season in the NCAA, like almost a point per game player, but not really that impressive if you only watch his points. Like it's tough to explain to someone who has never seen him play. Like, yeah, the point usually freshman defenseman that gets almost point per game, you're gonna rave about that player. It's tough to explain that his points don't really tell the whole story about his ultimate upside. Rather, I'll let you go on Levshunov. I know some people are waiting for you to rant for 20 straight minutes on Levshunov, so
I'll try
I'll let
not
you
to.
go.
Yes, 20 might be too low. I'll try for 10. So, one of my favorite quotes is the greatest joy in life is irony. And ironically, when we saw him 2 years ago in Belfast, I remember saying to you, I'll be I'll be shocked if he isn't competing with Celebrini for that number one, and it probably ends up number two. And then we watched him this season. I remember telling you, I can't believe how far off we were. He's nowhere near number two, and he's the consensus ranked number two. So I don't know. I don't know. Some people look at this stuff very differently than us, and that could be both a gift and a curse depending on the player, I guess. But yeah, so let's take you guys back. We're fortunate. We have the software and the technology and the time necessary to go watch some of these kids in these obscure leagues. And admittedly, like we're comfortable with it. I know I've watched a lot of Belarus. It upsets Mark Edwards a lot, and I enjoy doing it. So I do it as often as I can. I watch these secondary tier leagues. I think there's a lot to learn from them too, from a scouting perspective. In Belarus Vashaya, this player was incredibly tantalizing. Like he was already a freak of nature physically back then. He was the same size back then as he is now. Like really, his growth rate has stopped in this draft year because it's something that I think is under discussed. Like he was a huge kid back then, and then you see the handling ability. And he had one of the best goals I've ever seen when he was 15, and he was the most talented player I've ever seen from that league. And but there was one drawback, and I didn't take into consideration then because it was 2 years down the line until we actually had to worry about him. And I thought maybe he would develop it. And that was that he compartmentalizes his skill set. And what I mean by that is that when you take his handling, you look at it and you just what it is, it's fantastic. He's got small area handling. It's just very quick, very dexterous. He knows what he's doing. He's very adaptive with it, so he can like fly through the neutral zone if a stick comes towards him. He knows how to appropriately handle the puck and take advantage of that. Right? He can process the play quickly enough to do that, and then you take his shooting mechanics, and again, Belarus Vashaya, one of the best goals I've ever seen, where he did exactly the opposite of what we talked about with Konsta Helenius, where he suddenly changed his shooting angle. So he had like this beautiful hesitation, double rock back. Then he skated into space and he set up the shot and manipulated his shot through the triangle of the defenseman. Goalie didn't even read and react to it. It was just perfect, right? And I was like, oh my God, 6'2", and just as you mentioned, it was almost like Cale Makar like at that age. And it's like this is going to be unbelievable. And then you look at the playmaking, and it was a bit raw, a bit behind at that time relative to the handling, relative to the shot. But then you look at it this season, it's pretty finesse oriented. So it's kind of like Pavel Minchkov's. Minchkov's got that beautiful touch to him when he's setting up his passing plays. There's this softness, there's this touch to how he sets everything up. Levshunov has some of that. He's a big man with soft skill, right? And so you take those three components and you're like, this is an offensive defenseman through and through. This is going to be a fantastic offensive defenseman who can quarterback a power play, who's going to look unbelievable. That's what happened. You take the 2 years of Shai, you fast forward to the end of the season, there was no difference in terms of how he actually operates with his skill set. He still isolates and compartmentalizes each component. So when he's in the offensive zone, he'll receive a pass, and then he'll make a side shuffle or a side step somebody who's pressuring him from the line. Then he'll use his handling, and then he'll try to set up his shot. It's like, okay, that's fine. But can you do a lateral cutback and then suddenly stop up, then off look the lateral option, then spin off the pressure, then cut down further to the goal line, then go through another player that sets something up like Cale Makar could by the end of his draft eligible season, like Miro Heiskanen could at the end of his draft eligible season, like some of these other players. Owen Power at the World Championships. Look what he was doing at the offensive line. That has not come together. It's not there. We've waited 2.5 years. Jérôme and myself have watched him longer than most people. Straight up, I watched him more than most NHL scouts in terms of actual curve for sure. Most NHL stars don't watch Belarus Vashayev for good reason. It's no waste of their time. But that was a player that we honed in on early. So you look at the offensive ceiling, and theoretically, it suggests a top pairing defenseman. Theoretically, it suggests maybe a number one defenseman, but it has not materialized. So when is it going to? We don't know. So we took that into consideration, said maybe it won't. And that's why he's a bit further down from the offensive perspective. Now, the other aspect of this, and that's why I will get to 20 minutes. The other aspect of this is that when you look at his hockey sense, he's nowhere near as intelligent as some people think. And this comes down to one of the most, not one of the most, the most important concept in hockey, adaptive processing. You ever want to see the top end of a draft, who makes it to who doesn't? It's who has the highest end adaptive processor 9 out of 10 times. Like the reason Connor McDavid is because he's going that fast and then can adaptively process everything on the ice at that speed. That is built in, it's ingrained, you cannot learn it. Okay. So I've had conversations outside of hockey about this with elite athletes. I've been very fortunate. I've had fellow Canadians, we're all Canadian here. Devin Larac, famous arm wrestler, number one arm wrestler right now in terms of popularity. He just did 1 million subs on YouTube. Congrats, Devin. I've got an opportunity to go to Turkey multiple times and have dinners with him, sit down with him, pick his brain about sport in general. He was just a strength athlete for 30 years. He was in basketball, arm wrestling, and he was an elite special forces unit in Canada, so in the Army. And I talked to him, and he asked me, he was like, he found out I was a scout, and he was like, what do you think is the most important criteria that separates any sort of competitive sportsman? And I told him instantly, I said, it's an adaptive processor. It's true in arm wrestling, it's true in hockey, it's true in fighting, it's true in basketball, it's true in soccer, it's true in everything. And he nodded his head, and he said, I completely agree with you. We went back and forth for 4 hours. He was discussing military training and how it's always measured. We were discussing other sports. The point of saying this is that when you look at some of the top end talent in this town, Zayne Parekh has a better adaptive processor. Zeev Buium has a much better adaptive processor. And the way that this looks on ice is twofold. One, you're going to see a defenseman show more poise. The other aspect is you're going to see a defenseman who's making plays in advance of the opponents. It's almost like a Musashi effect. I'm sure some of you have read the Book of Five Rings, studied what Musashi's concepts are. You can apply it to most things. From a hockey perspective, it's having an attacker dictate the terms to the defenseman and then manipulate the defenseman in advance of the defenseman attempting to do something to you. That is what Zeev Buium is capable of. It's what Zayne Parekh is capable of. Artyom Levshunov is not as capable in that regard. Artyom Levshunov's not one of the highest end adaptive processors in this class. He's not the player who's thinking 2-3 steps ahead and folding in defensemen by outthinking them and outprocessing them. That's not his gifts. His gifts are he's 6'2", he's a heavy set kid, he's a powerful kid, he has a well-rounded skill set, and then when you isolate each area of his skill set, it's great, it's fantastic in some areas, but it's not merged together. It's not cohesive. It's not fluid. And that's why we're further back on him. And that's why we have Zeev Buium way pushed up in advance. Quote me on this. This is another thing that I'm really happy that Jérôme and myself get to do this publicly, is that unlike honestly a lot of people online, we're not going to run away from when we make mistakes. In fact, I can't wait to tell you when we make mistakes, because then everybody gets to learn from it together. That's one of my favorite things about this sport. It's so difficult to actually scout correctly. And when you make mistakes, it's time to learn. So let's do it together. And so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're wrong as a staff, Jerome. Maybe Artyom Levshunov is the actual consensus too. And there are people that I respect in this industry that absolutely think that. But the way that we scout, and the way we've had some success, and we've had a lot of success with some of these defensemen, from Moritz Seider to Braden Schneider to Miro Heiskanen to Kale McCarr. Don't get me wrong, we can make mistakes too. We absolutely do that. So if Levshunov ends up better than what we're saying he's going to be, I'll be the first to call myself out, first try to figure out what happened, and the first to discuss it. But hopefully I don't know if we hit 20 minutes. We're trying to but, he's a good defensive prospect though.
If Levshunov becomes, what people think he is, you and I will do a YouTube video on what went wrong.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
So
Yeah, it's a good series
so
to do. Honestly,
yeah,
great series for everybody to get involved with because it teaches everything. That's what this
you,
is about. It's about learning.
you can't be a good scout if you don't know why you're missing and how did you miss your evaluation on a player. You can't if you're not ready to accept that you're wrong and why you're wrong and willing to make the correction, you're never going to be a good scout. You're just going to be some wannabe scout somewhere. Um, Number 9, a guy that I really didn't think was going to be in your top 10 if you asked me in August, Zayne Parekh. Um, didn't think I I really like his offensive game, but I thought defensively he was just a nightmare. And I think that's where he made the biggest progress for me this year was his defensive game. Like it's everyone talk about his defensive game, but they don't know. They're just saying, well, he's bad defensively, but they don't really know what he's bad at and what he's good at. So to me, he's a above average athlete. I think he's a good skater, not a great one. Um, but we're just talking about Levshunov. He processed the game a lot better than Levshunov. His gap is much better than Levshunov. That's where he made the biggest progress, in my opinion, was his rush defense. You know, is he as good as maybe Tanner Molendyk last year? No, but he did make some really good progress with his ability to defend against the rush, where he struggles, and we mentioned this when talking about Yakemchuk was, down low, in front of the net. He's just very weak physically. Um, he's not. He's gonna get overpowered by bigger players. Um, so I just did a podcast last week, and they were asking me, "Can he play in the NHL next year?" And it's like, no. That would. I mean, I wouldn't. If I was a team that drafts him, I wouldn't play. I wouldn't play him at 18 in the NHL because physically, it's going to be really challenging for him. I would give him like one extra year in junior. Um, but yeah, the defensive game was the main point that improved. Mostly the rush defense. His play in his own zone is still a work in progress. Um, because one, he's weak physically, and two, so he's a smart player. He processed the game well, but he needs to learn how to not get destroyed on the ice in his own zone. Uh, you look at Erik Karlsson, Quinn Hughes, they don't really get hit a ton on the ice. So if you watch Parekh play any games against London this year, like London were going like I think they had 5 guys on their hit list in the pregame, and the 5 guys were Zayne Parekh, Zayne Parekh, Zayne Parekh, Zayne Parekh, Zayne Parekh. So they were, he was definitely part of the game plan. They were going hard after them, and London they are run like an NHL team. So when Parekh gets to the NHL, like he's gonna be on the hit list for the other team. Um, so he's gonna have to learn how to. It's one thing to get it in junior, but if you get it like he has got it in junior by NHL players, like that could lead to injury, and that it's a bit of a concern for me. Um, but he's smart. I think he processed the game well. I think he's gonna figure it out. But um, we appreciate the heart, the courage of Parekh, where he needs to be a bit smarter at. You know, he has no point to win and just getting hit like he has got it this year. So that's one thing I want to see him improve next year. If he goes back to junior, um, obviously I could talk about his offensive game. Probably, maybe I'll let you go with his offensive game, but he's definitely a guy that like super smart, incredible passer. Like he has played some this year, which has some perfect game, like perfect passing game. Does not miss one pass all game. And obviously, like we know he can score a lot of goals. Score, I believe, three goals this year. Um, just terrific offensive player. Defensively, he has improved, but he's still not where we want him to be. Maybe like if you really go deep in the analysis, maybe the playoff hockey, it's a bit of not a concern, but if you compare him with defensemen that are above him, there's a bit of a you know question mark here with how is he going to perform come playoff hockey, because he was much better in the regular season this season than he was in the OHL playoff. He got hurt in the OHL playoff also, but his level of play was not at the same level in the playoffs. So, Brad, I'll let you go on Zayne Parekh.
So I'm sure somebody listening is like, okay, arguably the most gifted offensive defenseman, maybe something like Quinn Hughes, Cale Makar, in case you haven't seen. The answer is no. He's nothing like that. He operates differently. The way that Makar and Quinn Hughes use their skating during their retrievals, their ability to be shifty and evasive and just drive possession through their skating, that's not how Zayne Parekh functions. The way Zayne Parekh functions, I'll explain how I broke it down in the Black Book, is basically he has a bird's eye view of the rink somehow in his mind. I don't remember there was a famous painter who did the what's the oh, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was an elite painter, and one quality he had is he could actually like look over a city, and he could like paint the city down to the windowsill correctly. And that was just by walking through the city, and he could do it from a bird's eye perspective and like paint the picture that way. It's Da Vinci. There we go. I knew it would come eventually. Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci had that quality, and this kid is. This kid is the Da Vinci of playmaking. This kid, for some reason, when you're down on the ice surface, you're supposed to not be able to see everything. Like there's players in front of you. There's supposed to be lanes that are blocked, so you don't know what's actually available. For some reason, that does not apply to this kid, and that's built in. He's got a GoPro up there. I don't know what's going on. It's unbelievable. His vision is second to none in this class. Passing execution rates, Jérôme mentioned, are just spectacular. So he doesn't need to skate the puck like when he was a Cale Makar, is my point, right? So that's one of the differentiating qualities between them. Now, the real question is, where does this player lie on a spectrum between Adam Boqvist at the lowest and Erik Karlsson at the highest? So that was really what we had to determine. As a staff, that was what we were after, right? Because Adam Boqvist has burned us. He's burned the industry, right? And so why did Adam Boqvist fail? What has happened with Adam Boqvist? So one of the reasons, Jérôme has already brought it up, injury rate. Adam Boqvist is injured all the time. Why? Because he never learned how to protect himself. Spectrum. Can he be Erik Karlsson? He is a dual threat like Erik Karlsson. He's also physically underdeveloped at the same age, just like Erik Karlsson. And there was questions about his defensive upside, just like Erik Karlsson. I will say Erik Karlsson, better skater at the same age. I would also argue that Erik Karlsson understood how to play defensively, positionally better earlier than Zayne Parekh. It took Zayne Parekh a bit longer than it did Erik Karlsson at the same age. So when you look at the curves, though, by the end of the season, it shows that a player that potentially could become Erik Karlsson, if not Erik Karlsson-like. And so our ranking kind of meets him halfway with that, where, yes, there is potential for that to occur, but we're trying to take the risk into consideration too, right? But this is a player who, admittedly, like Artyom Levshunov, I'd be much more blown away by if he ends up top 3 in the redraft. I really do have to do the series we just talked about, Jérôme. But this kid, this is different. Zayne Parekh could absolutely end up 2 or 3 in a redraft, if not 1. To be honest, that's how talented Zayne Parekh is. That's how exceptional his vision is. He has a quality that's just completely unteachable. He's got that Da Vinci-like overhead view of the ice for whatever reason. So remarkably gifted, extremely difficult to rank. I would suggest, we had a range of them around 6 to 10, I think, for most of our staff, which I think is fair. And the sky's the limit. He's as boom or bust to me as it gets. And again, Adam Boqvist being the bust, and then Erik Karlsson being the hit, and maybe he ends up something in between that. We'll see, but unbelievable talent.
Yeah. At number 8, that was a debate we had, Dickinson versus Parekh. So we went with Dickinson. More of a safe bet, I think. Not to play in the NHL. Like obviously we think both are going to play in the NHL if we're ranking them top 10. But we we look at Parekh maybe like in the OHL playoff, and we look at Dickinson in the OHL playoff, and at the same time we're watching NHL playoff. We're like, there's a lot more Dickinson like player having success in the NHL playoff than player that play and look like Zayne Parekh. So that's why we went with Dickinson above Parekh. 6'3", fantastic skater. My comp for him is Noah Hanifin, formerly the Flames and now with Vegas. I think that comps is perfect for him. Both 6'3" defensemen, both can really skate. Hanifin went third overall in 2015. Looking back, probably too high, but still a very, very good pick if you pick in, between, I don't know, 6 and 10. You're really happy with that pick, but maybe third overall, you probably wish you got more out of that pick. A reason why the Hurricanes traded him to Calgary pretty quickly after drafting him. Good offensively, but not great. Good defensively, but not great. Physicality is, when needed, it's good, but he's not a very mean, tough player to play against. Again, all very similar to Hanifin. So I think that fits really well as far as like a comparable. The good thing about him is that he plays for London Knights. He know what they're doing with developing players, developing defensemen. He has played a lot of hockey in the last 2 years. London lost in the OHL final last year. He was playing some good minutes for a 16 years old rookie, and Dale Hunter does not play 16 years old if they're not good. Usually they're playing junior A or junior B. Like, Sam Dickinson was playing some big heavy minutes last year. The other 16 years old I remember that played a lot for them was Mitch Marner, but the list is very short of like 16 years old that play good minutes with the Knights. And this year, obviously, they won the OHL championship, playing in the Memorial Cup. So, Dickinson has played a ton of hockey in the past 2 years and big games, and very high level hockey. Also play internationally for Canada at the Olympia. So this is a kid who has played a lot. He can play a lot of minutes. There's a lot to like about this player. We just wish maybe like he did produce a lot this year, but we don't really see him as a big PP1 guy at the NHL level. So that limits a bit how high we want to put him. And defensively, we wish he was a bit better. He's not bad, but he's good, but he's not great. If he was great and a real shutdown guy for us, like elite shutdown abilities, we're talking something close to a Jake Sanderson type player, but he's not really that for us. So we like Sam Dickinson, but I think 8 was the highest. I think we could go with him on our list. Brad?
Yeah, so when we're looking at his top end, there's more dynamic talent, and then there's that safety valve, right? Sam Dickinson fits the safety valve. One of the youngest defensemen in the class. The other factor is that because we do have Mark Edwards has a very good connection with the Hunters. Like we know what he is off ice, and his off ice habits are exceptional. He's the first to practice, the leave, character kid, natural leader, wants to really learn, and so that really gives us a better understanding that the development curve might go past what we've currently seen. And what we've currently seen, as Jérôme mentioned, is good, great shooter. Probably is a power play 2 guy, not a power play 1 guy, if that. More of a transitional puck moving defenseman that's built for even strength than anything. And again, one of the best skaters in this class. But the thing with Dickinson is that when you look at his age, and you look at the fact that I think he was playing the right way almost to a fault. I wonder if there's more there creativity from a creative perspective, and really. When you look at it, if you like compare him to Zayne Parekh, you compare him to some of these other top end kids, that's the one thing he's really lacking. He's not an overly creative or inventive player. He's very streamlined. And like, don't get me wrong, you want some of the these players to be streamlined for you because you know exactly what you're getting from them each shift, and it can be very helpful for a coach. When it comes to the top end of a class, typically you're looking for the most inventive, the most creative players that can actually translate their games. Like Ivan Demidov is a perfect example of a player we're about to talk about that has some of that, right? But yeah, so there was a great debate here, and it was all year among our staff of where to put some of these kids because Zayne Parekh way more risk, but way more inventive, way more creative, way more intelligent, way more dynamic. But then Dickinson, much better skater, much safer, younger, right? So there's these are the types of discussions we had to have when you break down each individual attribute. So I think Jérôme is the first, to my knowledge, to come up with the Hanifin comparison that I at least heard. I think it's the perfect one. He really is Noah Hanifin 2.0. So he's going to be a great defenseman. If he's going to be like top five in a redraft, it's because he ends up being more inventive and finding and experimenting in a way that actually works for him next season in a way that we haven't seen. And maybe then he'll look even like more of a high end top pairing defenseman than he does right now. So we'll see. It'll be very interesting to watch him.
Yeah. At number 7, we have Tij Iginla on the Kelowna Rockets. If you look at players that we just talked about in this podcast and the previous podcast, like Iginla might be the guy who has improved the most since last year. Like, obviously, he was not playing a whole lot with Seattle, but watching him at the U17 last year, like I got a good sample of what he was. I didn't really expect him to be a top 10 player. Watching him from last year, like I didn't really get that vibe watching him. So there's one skill set that is never talked about with players that I really paying more attention is, and it's tough to figure that out, obviously, but it's those players that have this ability to just get better and better and better every year. I think the best example I got is maybe Brad Marchand. Watch him in junior, thought he was going to be a depth player in the NHL, third line energy winger, and he has become a star, right? And that's the role he was playing with Canada toward junior. He was just a like two-way energy winger, a pass, and that everyone thought this was going to be his role in the NHL. Maybe a Darcy Tucker type player. And then he gets to the NHL, and every year just get better, works on his skill. And I look at Iginla, the work he did from last year to this year, how much he improved his shot, his ends, adding more deception to his game. All that combined start, and everything, he started to figure it out a lot more this year, and everything started making sense with adding all those elements to his game. And then you have a guy that came to Kelowna, scored 47 goal, I believe, this year. Just dangerous player, one-on-one, dangerous with his shot. He can score from anywhere in the offensive zone, but he's not just a guy like that is going to be dangerous with his shot. Like, if you compare, let's say, to Yzerman, the shot, but Iginla is like he's going to score every different way you can think of. I've seen him, go in the corner, win a puck battle, get the puck to a teammate. He goes to the net, gets a deflection, gets a rebound, gets a goal. I've seen him create, havoc on the forecheck. Really strong forecheck guy. Wins his battle, doesn't lose many battle. Very easy player to cheer for. Like this year, this class this year was a tough one for me to really, fell in love with a player because there's not like Celebrini was an easy one, obviously, but last year was, you mentioned Zach Benson. Zach Benson was an easy player to fall in love with because he had, to compete, the hockey sense, the skill, obviously, the two-way game. Obviously, the injury concern was, something. But Iginla was in the same boat. I felt the same way with, Seth Jarvis in his draft year, Jack Quinn in his draft year. Um, Guys that just the thing with Iginla is like I talk often about players that have different layers to their game. Iginla, people will talk about the goal scoring, but he does so many other things on the ice that he's so valuable to his coach, to his team. Um, like he's a good penalty killer. Um, he's not a huge guy, he's about 5'11", 6 feet, but he doesn't lose many battles. He plays hard. He plays in traffic. He plays where it's gonna hurt. He goes to the net. Um, and I'm a huge fan of his game, and we have him 7. There was some debate about of having him a bit higher, but the guy at number 6 really made a great case for himself with his end of the season and playoff. But we're really confident with Iginla. It's a player that really can't miss, I think, for us. So Brad, what did you see of Iginla? Because I know you were really high on him really early on this year. I know you were watching Kelowna really early on this season, so you got to see him pretty early on.
Well, yeah, it's just, I mean, the shot pops so quickly, right? You see a shooting mechanics, you're like, oh, there's something here, right? So, with Iginla, top 3 shooter in this class, for my money, it's Yzerman, Iginla, Celebrini, probably in that order. For in terms of shooters, Catton falls somewhere in there between 4 and 5, 6. In terms of players we at least talked about today, Michael Brandsegg-Nygard is up there too. But yeah, so Tij Iginla. So I'm going back to my bomber reference. So it's developers, 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 development curves, development curves, development curves, development curves. As Jérôme mentioned, arguably the best forward curve in the entire draft. That means what we're seeing is not what we're going to get, and it's going to even be better, right? And so when you look at him right now, I think honestly, appropriate slot range for him would actually be just if you took right what we saw this year, it's kind of like Jett Luchanko, you move him back a little bit. Like for me, 11 to 13 sounds the most appropriate. We have him top 7, 8. Why? Because we're factoring in that curve. This is a player who has had just a tremendous development curve. It's looking more and more now like he's going to actually remain a center long term. And I know for some of you, you're surprised to see Tij Iginla above Berkly Catton. I know that I went into a very long-winded rant about Catton. I'm going to keep this very simple. We think it's far more likely because of Iginla's compete that he remains a center relative to Catton. Catton will just is not as competitive, not as good defensively, intrinsically as Iginla is for our money. And that's why we think Iginla has a better chance of remaining at center. And that's why you see him above Catton. Now the rest is close in some ways. And like goal scoring, actually, it's very interesting when you break down their scoring rates because Iginla's the better shooter relative to Catton, but the way Catton sets up some of his shooting from a mechanical perspective is actually superior to Iginla's, specifically within tight seam recognition. That's like a very underrated trait with some of these high-end snipers is it's not so much that they're just like Alex Ovechkin-like and they're just overpowering netminders, right? And they're not just overpowering goalies. What they're doing is systematically recognizing seams as the goalie's moving. That's what we refer to as dynamic seam recognition. That is a super underrated trait. It's also one of the reasons I tell people that don't love to evaluate goalies, hey, you're missing out because if you evaluate the position, at least to a functional level, you get a much better appreciation for different types of snipers that aren't just overpowering. They're recognizing specific seams and adapting in real time to the transitional rate of the goalie, right? So Iginla does that. Catton does it better. And it's interesting. So yeah, Iginla's got that shot goalie from distance. He's terrifying from distance, just like Yzerman. But then Celebrini, or not Celebrini, Catton gets close to the net, and you get that high end seam recognition that can kind of get him to catch back up. So just for a bit of a comparison for our viewers. The other thing with Tij Iginla is every year I try to find the players that are the best coming off the half wall, just being able to figure out a way to come off the half wall with the puck and make something happen. Because Tij Iginla's not actually that great in terms of his athletic skating. Like he's not that good at getting off the center line. It's not that he's this amazingly explosive, athletically gifted skater. Yet, despite that, he is exceptional at recognizing small area spaces where he can squeeze through them, even when he's getting having to have multi-coverage situations happen. So when defensemen are collapsing on different angles on him, he's still finding a way to get out of the corners effectively, and that's a very good sign, right? Because that leads to more line driving implication down the line than what we've seen even from him this past season. So you take these factors. Now, the other thing I guess we could discuss, Jerome, is like playmaking rates. Like they're not the best, and then handling ability. He's very mixed. So there's like a large spectrum of outcomes with his hands. Sometimes his hands look super dynamic. Other times he lets his hands get the best of him. He just even like not the most high danger type of dekes or not the most difficult dekes can get just knocked off the stick. Like he just has difficulty setting up his hands occasionally. I thought that didn't really let up towards the end of the season either. So that's something next year I'm looking to see improvement in. But again, like that could come down to sample rates too. So it just depends what games you get to evaluate. But incredible riser. I think Jérôme is 100% accurate when he describes this player as our Seth Jarvis. We thought Seth Jarvis was top 10 all day. When you factor in the growth rate, Tij Iginla falls into that category as well.
Yeah. Just one last thing on Catton versus Iginla. I think we can agree. Catton better at making zone entry, better one-on-one.
Definitely.
Iginla better down low, better forechecker, and I think his playoff hockey value will be higher than Catton. We kind of saw that in the WHL playoff. They both play against Prince George, and Iginla was obviously a different situation. Kelowna was a better team than Spokane, but we felt like Iginla proved more in this playoff series against Prince George than Catton, but Catton did not play like awful in that series because I remember we talked about this playmaking was actually it was better in that first round. Anyway, moving on to number 6 with Beckett Sennecke of Oshawa. Wow, really interesting player, really interesting curve. Obviously, it's been pretty well known now that this kid was 2 years ago about 5'9", and now he's 6'3". Some people think he's going to finish at 6'4". That is pretty incredible to grow. It's not only to grow, 4 inches, 5 inches in 2 years is how it affects you as a hockey player. Like obviously the coordination is the number one thing, but also you have to pretty much learn a lot of new things because some things you can't do at 5'9", and then when you're 6'3", you can do. You don't play like a power forward at 5'9". Like 6'3", you can start playing a more power forward-ish game. So Sennecke was an interesting one. So it's funny to say that from Oshawa. They went to the OHL final. But this was not a very gifted offensive team. So Sennecke started the year, like their best player is Ritchie, and Ritchie was not there early on in the year. And even when he came back from his injury, they were not playing together. So at some point they got to play together, and that seems to give Sennecke a lot more confidence and a really good player to play with him, and that really helped him in the second half of the season. And you just have to look at his number in the last 20 games of the season, plus his playoff, where he was really good. So what you see from Sennecke right now is definitely not what you're going to see in 3 years, 4 years. This is a player we're still progressing. He's still adding more skill to his game because of his frame changing so much and so quickly. So, in 3 years, 4 years, you might be looking at a 6'4", 200+ pound, power forward. He was not that a year ago. So very interesting package that NHL team can draft here. One thing me and Brad talk often about him was the I don't want to say the lack of finish, but he's not a high end, sniper. So if we just for fun, because he scored under 30 goals this year. So just for fun, I was looking at players that went top 10 in the draft that did not score 30 goals, and the success rate is not that great. So there's some good one. Mark Scheifele is one. Scott Arnold is one, but there's also some pretty big time buzz. So I want to believe today's scout, including us, are a lot better at scouting than they were in 2002 or 2003 or 2004, where when there was a lot of miss on players. So I'm not as worried about the Sennecke, lack of finishing abilities, because he did finish at a pretty good rate to finish the year, and in the playoff, the biggest, more important games, he was finishing at a higher rate. So again, development curve, really good. But he's a really smart passer. He's a really good passer. He's a line driver, which when you can get your hand on a prospect as a line driver, usually you don't miss. But those are tougher to it's a tough one to scout, because not everyone knows what a real line driver is. But we feel Sennecke is one of them, and if you're gonna do a rankings, you might as well put all your line driver at the top of your list. Those guys matter, and those guys are the tempo setter of your line. So Sennecke, yes, the goal scoring, a bit of a, not a question mark, but it's, are we going to predict he's going to score 40 goals in the NHL? No. But we think he's got enough to score 25, 30. We think the playmaking is really strong. And more, as we mentioned, like he's getting more comfortable with his frame, and he's playing a more physical game. There's a great quote on the Black Book. I'll let people go check that quote in the Black Book. But there's a great quote by NHL scout about him sparing another player this season, and I'll leave it to that. But it's probably my favorite quote of the book. So anyway, Sennecke, we have him 6. It was pretty close between him and Iginla, but we felt like long-term potential, skill level with size. I think he was winning that battle against Iginla for us. And the top 5 was pretty close also, but we really like our top 5. Him and Demidov was a conversation we had, but we felt the skill level and the upside of Demidov was a bit, too rich to put Sennecke in front of him. But it was definitely a conversation we had. So Brad, as I'm ranting here, what was your take on Sennecke this year?
Well, he's a unique situation for us because he's the only line driving winger we have in the top 10. He's the only one that's there, and that's because of the growth curve and because of the way he operates within his windows of space and time. So one of the huge things about this player is that when you look at what the projectable pro value is when he's 23, 24, it should be a player that basically is untouchable when he's handling the puck. And the reason why is because he's arguably one of the top, I'd say, two or three handlers in this class. But then you take in the athletic gifts and the ability to actually synchronize his skating into his handling. And then the 6'4" frame, it really paints a picture of somebody that just is going to be able to manipulate defense and set everything up. And that's the other huge factor. As Jérôme has mentioned, the goal scoring rates, they're not going to be the best. They're 25, 30 goals sounds about right. And he'll do it through extending his operating windows, meaning he's gonna fake a shot, drive around on his backhand, wait for a goalie to overcommit, then use his range and find scoring ways that way. That's one of a lot of different examples I give you in terms of like how he's going to get the job done when he's not that, he's not a Berkly Catton adaptive pick sniper who picks his spot type of thing. He's not so much that. It's more of the transitional one-on-one rushing upside. So admittedly, this player reminds me a little bit of Igor Surin. I know it's a strange comp, but the reason why is because they both look to operate with their handling first. They both look to attack defensemen without incorporating their teammates as often as they should. And there's a bit of junior quality in that regard that needs to be retracted, pulled back so they become a pro and be as efficient as they need to be once they hit the NHL. So however, I do bring up Surin for two reasons. That's the first reason. The other reason with Surin is that Surin is not the greatest playmaker, doesn't see the ice that well. Beckett Sennecke does. And that's the massive critical feature of this player. It's one thing to have the operating rates he does with his handling and his windows, extending the windows, being able to attack one-on-one, but he actually knows how to identify high danger options quickly. He can hit weak side targets. He can hit backdoor options. He can open up the ice. That's what gives this kid all the potential in the world. It's the primary playmaking that separates him. It's not so dissimilar to Mikko Rantanen in terms of just how the handling and the frame handling and playmaking. Don't get me wrong, Mikko Rantanen was miles ahead of him physically in terms of helmet. It's like Mikko Rantanen was a monster in his draft year. Like he was manhandling grown men in Liga. Beckett Sennecke is not that. So don't get me wrong. From a physical perspective, he's not that. But in terms of handling and playmaking rates and how they operate, there is actually some similarities. And when you project that Sennecke 23, 24 and catch up a little bit, he'll never reach what Rantanen is. But if he can catch up enough, then you get that line driving, that possession driving game, the down low game, the ability to just make unbelievable plays coming off the walls. He's going to be able to attack on unique angles. He's going to be able to do a ton of things for a team that is just very unique. And again, we talked about curves a lot today. Tij Iginla has one of the best, so does Beckett Sennecke. Like you look at Beckett Sennecke from the start of the season up to the end of the playoffs, it was night and day, really night and day.
Yeah, moving on to number 5, Anton Silayev from Russia. 6'7", defenseman, lefty, playing mostly on the right side this year. When we talk about, the best athlete in this draft class, he's right up there. He's a giant. The fact that he played full-time in the KHL at 17 is, really impressive. And it's like he didn't just play 20 games. He played 60-plus game, played around 15, 16 minutes per game. A bit slowed down a bit in the second half of the season, but he showed so much, potential for us. I think people are getting on his case because he's not going to be a big point producer. But, I'm okay with him as a 35-point defenseman because I know that defense is going to be elite. I think he's got enough to be a 30, 35-point guy, maybe even more. It's very challenging because what he did this year has never been really done before. Like having a 17-year-old defenseman play full-time in the KHL from, August, September to the end of the season. That's never been done. Dmitry Simitchev last year played 20-some game. Mikhail Gulyayev, 20-some game. One of our biggest miss, Alexander Nikishin, played 20-some games in his draft year, and people said, no upside, no talent. I mean, we were probably maybe one of those people that said that about him in his draft year. We love the size, we love the physicality, and look at it now. He just had 2 back-to-back seasons in the KHL with 50-plus points. I'm not saying it's going to happen with Silayev, but I'm a bit more cautious about you know projecting his offensive game. I think it's a pretty safe bet he's going to be a 35 point guy, but I'm not going to close the door on more potential out of him because I didn't really see it from Dickinson in his draft year, and he was a year older, like he was a late birthday. Um, so, but offense doesn't matter. Whether he's a 30 point, 45 point, 50 point guy. The reason why we love him is his defense. He could end up being one of the better elite shutdown defensemen in the NHL. We really believe that. Um, Physicality, like he's 6'7". He he covers so much space on the ice with his skating. His skating, it's not fair to skate that well at that age with that size. Like it's like if you look at all the players with that size, with Chara, Pronger, uh, Victor Edmond, nobody skate like this. They were not fantastic skater like Silayev is. I'm not saying he's as good as those players, but the skating base with that frame is insane to me. Um, yes, is playing the second half. Was a bit. I don't even want to say concerning, but we always want to see players improve, improve, improve. This was not like a small regression in this game, but we just love that player. I know some people are really hard on him because he's not a flashy offensive player, but I don't know. Do people watch the NHL playoff? Like I watch the NHL playoff and I look at Silayev, I'm like, man, if I'm an NHL team, like why would I not want this on my team? Like at 23, 24, 25, how big is he gonna be? 6'8", 240 with that skating and he's mean? Like, I don't know. He, to me, it was a really close battle between him and Zeev Buium for number one. Uh, we went with Buium, but it was a really good debate that we had. And in versus Demidov also, I had Silayev over Demidov just because of the size, the position he plays. Like defensemen are always more valuable than winger. But obviously Demidov has got some really high end, you know, high end skills and a really high end upside, and I get it. But I don't know. Silayev is a really special defenseman. Um, and I think I'm really curious where he goes, but I don't think he's gonna wait too long on draft day. There's some teams in the top five, top six that really love big defensemen, so I'm expecting him to go pretty high come draft day.
Yeah, so October, November, it looked like he was going to run away with the number two slot to me. Like he just, it's like, oh, that's the number two overall. There he is. Didn't know he was. He's unbelievable. He's just 7'6", 7 unicorn that looks like the Dano Chara reborn. Yeah, those don't exactly exist every draft, so they're going to go quickly. So one of the most important things to discuss with this player is the growth curve with his offense. It is not more Siders. I'm sure for some of you, it's like, well, if you draft him, he's 6'7", he ends up 230, he's Daniel Chara. What if he gets more Sider's offensive ability? The answer is very unlikely for two reasons. One, mechanically, never improved over the course of the season. Moritz Seider always showed a little bit more finesse with his handling playmaking combination right through the World Championships. The other factor is Moritz Seider's a more intelligent player to me. Anticipates the play better, offensively sees the ice a little better than Silayev does, especially at even strength. But that doesn't mean Silayev doesn't have more offensive upside than some people think. Some people think of him as very much just a pure shutdown, elite unicorn style player that insulates a top pairing, or at worst is a number four, insulates a second pairing. I think he ends up with 35, 40 point ceiling. I really do. I think there's more there. He's not a dumb player by any stretch of the imagination, and he got quarterbacking opportunities at the KHL level, and some of those, especially early, some of those viewings are pretty good. His game again, the curve, we talked about curves with Sennecke and Iginla, they were incredible. The curve of this player is not great. The curve kind of went backwards. It was, early looked spectacular, then conditioning, I think, played a factor. And then by the time he hit the NHL, this happened to a lot of players that play up. When you play in an elite league like the KHL and then you're going back down to the MHL, there's just an energy expenditure that really just decreased. You're not the same person. The gas tank ain't there. He's not as dialed in. He's not as consistent. He's not, he just didn't look like the same player to me. So yeah, in terms of development though, I mean, like, this is the closest player we've ever scouted that actually looks like anything that Zdeno Chara was. So you have to put him somewhere pretty high here. Like, it just is what it is. It's just so unique. He's a monster. And to Jerome's point, the most important thing about this player is the minute eating. He eats ice and he eats minutes. He's just eating everything. That's what this player is, and that's what he's going to be. And that is an incredibly useful player. Just won't always show up in the stat sheet.
Yeah. I just mentioned Demidov. So he's our number 4 ranked player. So again, MVP of the NHL this year, second year in a row that he's the MVP. Great in the playoff. Should have won the MVP of the playoff, but they didn't give it to him. But he was I believe 2 point per game rate in the playoff. I'm just a really high upside guy on the wing. Terrific hands. I mean, his hands are, and his one-on-one abilities are his best asset offensively. Better playmaker than a finisher. Like, we think he's good enough to finish around 30 goals per season. The playmaking is better. We think he can be a 30 goal, 50 assists, 80-point guy in his best year in the NHL. I nicknamed him early on in the year the Russian Zegras, because he's very flashy. But to be fair to him, it's not really a fair comparable because he's much more complete than Zegras is. I really like his effort level away from the puck. Is it perfect? No, but at his age, it's pretty good. I think he reads the play really well. The compete is good. Not great, but it's good. So I think he has, and if you want to compare it to Michkov, he's a lot more complete than Michkov, but Michkov is a fantastic finisher compared to Demidov. So that's the big difference between the two of them. One concern I have, and I think Brad and I have talked about this, is the skating. We have not really seen a lot of progress with skating. So agility wise, it's quite good. But like in explosiveness, straight line, it's a bit lacking. It's average. But is it hurting him? No, but he has not played. He only has played junior in the MHL, which is like, it's a fun league. The MHL is probably it's not probably, it is the best junior league in Europe, but it's not the KHL, and those are the viewings we're missing with Demidov. There was like a few KHL game at the beginning of the year, and I thought he looked quite good in those games, but there was just not enough of a sample playing in the KHL. So again, I think he kind of wasted his time this year playing in the NHL, but that's not really his fault. That was his team decision to send him back there, and he stayed there all year and he did what he had to do. Like, he was hands down the best player in the league. It looked at times too easy for him, but he did what he had to do, basically. So Demidov, I think next year is going to be interesting what happens with him. So as far as I'm concerned, like, what I've learned is that I don't see him playing another season in MHL. That would be another waste season for him. He needs to play with SKA, but I wonder how much ice time are they going to give him. I think that's an issue some NHL team have. Like, what will be his usage next year, and he also cannot be loaned to another KHL team because he's on the last year of his deal. Unlike Michkov, who was loaned, but he had 3 more years left on his deal. Um, so that's a bit of my concern with Demidov is what, you know, is SK going to play him next year? Are they going to give him 5 minutes of ice time per game, or are they going to play him 12, 13, 14, 15 minutes? And it's also a very deep team, very talented team. So it's quite hard for young players to play on that team. So that is a bit of my concern with Demidov. But if we're just talking about the skill level of this player, like he deserves his spot at number 4. You can argue he could be higher. You could argue he should be 5 or 6, but he's very talented. Lots to like about this player, and he's definitely one guy that I'm really curious where he's going to go in the draft. A lot of people talk about Montreal at number 5. We'll see. Columbus at number 4 to have a lot of Russian already on the team. Maybe Silayev is an option for them at number 4 too. If he doesn't go at number 4, number 5, like does he go at number 6, number 7? So it's going to be really he's definitely going to be a story to follow. And before I let you talk, Brad, I just want to mention like people this season often talk about Cayden Lindstrom and his injury concern. Nobody really talks about Demidov hurting his knee twice this season. Well, his knee, at least his leg. I think one was a knee, and I don't know if the other one was really a knee injury, but it was definitely a leg injury. So he got hurt twice this season, and he's not really a player that protects himself well. Like he changed direction so quickly, and that can lead to the injury. And he's not able to protect himself because of how he skates and how he protects the puck. So that's a bit of a concern for me going forward. But the talent is so good. Like he's so smart, and his one-on-one abilities are just fantastic. I'm really curious where he goes in the draft, Brad.
Yeah, so to your point, like it's all about his inside edge work, right? So much like Matvei Michkov, they have to use 10-2 turning to compensate for the lack of north-south skating ability in open ice. And that puts him in susceptible positions because when he's getting weight on, he's going to be directly on the inside of his knee. So if he's getting pressed on, then there's a component there where he's getting torque generated on his knee in a bad angle, and then that's going to lead to susceptibility. It also means that he is a bigger target than you theoretically think because of his listed height, right? And so when you look at him in open ice, and this happened to Michkov last season, is they got clipped in their hip line and then they were taken out. And so there's more injury risk. It means he's also not as nimble or agile coming out of the corners. And the other thing that it projects to decrease his ceiling a little bit by is through the fact that it decreases driving rates. So when you look at Kirill Kaprizov, for instance, you compare him to Demidov, Michkov. Kaprizov's the one that can drive possession better than either of them. And so I'm sure everybody's thinking, well, hopefully this is the next Kirill Kaprizov. We could really use that. He is in terms of his playmaking ability, in terms of the skill level of his handling. It's there, but in terms of his driving potential through his skating mechanics, it isn't. So there's the other thing, though, I'll say that maybe evens out a little bit is that usually a player this gifted, where you get literally like the best hand since Tim Stützle for my money, usually what happens is there's an uptick in the secondary skill that they have, and it becomes a primary skill over time. And in that case, that's his shooting. So right now, I think, yeah, he does project to be more of a 30 goal scorer, but I won't be shocked whatsoever. He ends up a 40, 50 goal scorer, even if things go really right, just because he is so gifted. And usually players this gifted can just learn concepts you just don't see in their initial draft season, right? And even if it's a skill one. And that's Demidov's case. So that's where Demidov gets very intriguing is, does he end up becoming an actual 100-point dual threat? Does he become a secondary shooter and does he remain a secondary shooter and become an 80-point player? And what are the driving rates and what do they look like? Because again, we don't think they're Kaprizovs. And so it'll be very interesting to see long term.
Yeah, I think the big difference between Kaprizov is like the skating ability. It's not at the same level. So that's why it makes it tough to like Kaprizov is man, he's so good. Number three, Zeev Buium, our number one ranked defenseman from Denver University. My goodness, what a year for him. Won the U18 World Championship last year, last April. The U20 World Championship in January, and then the NCAA Championship in April or March, I believe. So I think he's the smartest player, smartest defenseman in this draft class. Is the way he processed the game is, I think him and Parekh are kind of similar in how they process the game and how they sees the game. But I think defensively, definitely, Buium gets the advantage here. Much better at defending. Doesn't really make a lot of mistakes on the ice. Watching him in college this year, like this is one. Brad, I think you wrote in this profile. It's one of the best freshman year by defenseman ever. So very impressive player. It's funny because we scout his older brother Shaya 3 years ago, and we were really big fan of his brother who had more size than Zeev. But the thing with Zeev is that he has a lot of pushback in his game. So we can talk about the offense, the hockey sense, but one thing that is very different from his brother is there's a lot of pushback in his game. He's not huge. He's about 6 feet, but he doesn't back down from anybody. If he's challenged physically, he's gonna be right there, and that's everything for us. I mean, if he was a soft 6 foot defenseman, he wouldn't be number three on the list. So when we kind of figured out, okay, this kid's got some pushback, he's got some physicality, and he brings it, then we were like very very confident he was at worst like a top 10 pick in this class. And then the more I watch him in the second half of the season, like those NCAA playoff games, I was like, how does someone rank Levshunov above him? I don't. I was very confused by that because he was so much better than Levshunov in those big games. He just doesn't make any mistake out there. His skating has improved. You know, the offense is even better than what I think we, probably predicted. Looks like a true PP1 guy. Looks like a true first pairing defenseman for us. No weakness in this game. I mean, sure, we wish he was 6'3", but there's just a lot to like her, and hockey sense is everything for us basically. And you won't find a smarter defenseman in this draft than Zeev Buium. But I think he's one of those guys, and I'll let you talk after this, Brad. Is you really, really have to watch him. Like you really have to watch all the small details that he does on the ice, because you can watch him, and man, he does play a lot of minutes. Sometimes it can get like, that's a lot of like some of his game where if you just do a shift by shift video, usually a defenseman is about 20, 25 minutes. Some of his games were 35 minutes, 40 minutes, like ridiculous ice time. And, he's a freshman. They won the national championship, but he was their best player. He was just not, he was their, Denver does not win the national championship without Zeev Buium. As simple as that. He played way too many minutes, and he made so many good plays at both end of the ice. I'm a huge fan, and he's one of those guys. I think he's not far from the NHL. I think I look at the type of season he had this year, is like, is he how much better is he gonna get at Denver next year? So if I'm a team, I would really look into signing him right after the draft in the summer and try to bring him into my team. If I have a because I think he could play in AHL easily next year. And depending of like of the makeup of my team, like I think he could probably play in the NHL next season. Like I was so impressed by him at Denver this season. So Brad, I'll let you talk here.
Yeah, well, to your point, 1.19 points per game as a freshman in college, ranked second all time between best the best production since '83. I can't remember the player's name, but it was way back. It's before I was born, so that gives you an indication that yeah, it's a pretty good season, pretty unique season. It reminds me a lot of Adam Fox with grit. You know, there's a lot of Adam Fox in him with grit. You can make an argument he's even more dynamic than Fox. The only drawback to this player is the toolkit. Like that's legitimately the only drawback, and it's not bad. He's 6 feet. He's like a legitimate 6 feet, and his skating is fine. We wish it was a bit more dynamic. Some of his crossover mechanics are kind of janky, and he can skate over the top of himself occasionally and lack posture. But some of that's going to be corrected through strength. I know we've talked about a lot of mechanics that are correctable today, like Cold Boy Dance, but his are more correctable. So that's another huge factor to take into consideration why we have him ranked so high. The other is like, yes, Artyom Levshunov is bigger and stronger and skates better, and he's a toolsier defenseman. But when you look at the hockey sense component of Zeev Buium relative to Levshunov, it's night and day. They're not in the same world, right? So we'll take the defenseman where the sense is that much better relative than taking the kid who has a better toolkit. It's not like Levshunov's 6'7" too. It's not like Levshunov has Anton Silayev's toolkit. So that makes up a huge difference. Is to trying to give our listeners a bit of a contrast here as to why we have Buium ranked so aggressively relative to Levshunov. The other is like this top five, top 10, like you're taking a lot of variables into account that you typically wouldn't. And there's like some red flags where it's like, okay, every draft, there's like a couple busts here in the top. In this class, it could be more than a couple, right? Zeev Buium doesn't present that. Like there is no chance Zeev Buium doesn't play meaningful minutes in the top four in the NHL. Like there's just no chance of that not happening. And you can't say that about all these players, right? And so that's another huge factor with Zeev. But yeah, to your point, I think like when you look at accelerated curves, like you're going to wait a long time potentially for Zayne Parekh because of the physical limitations and him understanding when and how to make plays without taking abuse. And then Anton Silayev, I mean, you're waiting for that. You're waiting for him to fully grow. Well, you might need to wait a long time. And then the KHL contract situation, you never know, right? There's the KHL factor. Same with Demidov. So when you're looking at Zeev, really, there's a safety net here. And then there's a tremendous ceiling on top of the safety net. And you can say that about almost no one in this class. And that's one of the main reasons we love Zeev as much as we do.
Yeah. Coming at number two is a guy shocking, has been number two all year for us. Cayden Lindstrom, even the injury has not really scare us away from him. Obviously, we don't have access to all the testing. We don't have a hockey prospect doctor checking checking Lindstrom out, but we really like the potential of that player. Obviously, freak athlete, best athlete in the draft probably for us. 6'3", 6'4", skates like the wind, physical, nasty, um, um, really good shot, can score from distance, can score from in tight. Um, the playmaking is fine. It's not like a huge, strong part of his game, but it's fine. I think some people are overacting, thinking like he's not a smart player. Like this is wrong. I think. Um, we think he's like I think Brad, you mentioned in the book like dumb player don't make plays like Lindstrom can make. Um, so like his first half of the season was excellent. Um, almost a goal per game. you have to think about it. If his second half of the season continue like his first half, he goes on the same pace. He's scoring 55 goals this season in the WHL. You are telling me that 6'3" freak athlete, physical, nasty side, built for playoff hockey that scores 55 plus goals in WHL is not a slam dunk number two overall pick. I I have I have a really hard time believing that if he's healthy all year long, he doesn't go second overall. Unless there's a big regression in this game in the second half of the season, but that we'll never know. Um, but yeah, to me, he's healthy. He's a slam dunk second overall pick, and he does make a lot of sense for Chicago to pick him. Like he makes the most sense of all players in my opinion for Chicago to pick at number two. I don't know if they're going to go that route. Looks more like they're leaning towards Levshunov, but I look at their forward group: Bedard, uh, Nazar. You can say Oliver Moore. I mean, Lucas Reichel is their biggest power forward, and we all know Lucas Reichel is not a power forward. Um, so, and they always talk about they want speed with their forward group. Obviously, Bedard is not really there for his speed, and they got it with Nazar, but and Oliver Moore as well. But they need some size. And then when you get size and speed with Lindstrom and his scoring ability, and his size down the middle, I don't know. To me, it makes a lot of sense for Chicago at number two, but um, I don't know many people agree with us with Lindstrom as a number two guy. But hey, we'll see in 5 years who's right and who's wrong. And if we're dead wrong on that one, we'll make another video. We'll make another video with Levshunov. So we're a bit of a on the island by ourselves here. Not many. I don't know if anybody has Lindstrom as number two, but we're really confident with him as our number two guy. He's just a very unique player, and yeah, we're a big fan. So Brad, if you want to add something on Lindstrom.
Yeah, well, I'll say one thing was when you look at Chicago's drafting, they're not afraid to draft unicorns, and that's exactly what Cayden Lindstrom is. 6'3.5", elite center in terms of skating ability, peak power output, the explosiveness, the tenacity, the physicality, the ability to play a power game, but also play a finesse game. They're kind of like Chernyshov in that sense. He can play both ways, and he's nasty. He's a mean player. And I know for some in the industry, like you look online, it's like, oh, those penalty minutes are unnecessary, or oh, that was an unnecessary eye hit. He shouldn't have done that. That's a bad. Believe me, like I've talked to enough NHL staff and executives to know that they'll take it all day. They will take it all day long because it's way harder to compete against. Like there's a reason Brad Marchand is Brad Marchand. But you look at what they've done. Like look at Sam Renzel. Sam Renzel's a unicorn type of defenseman. He might not hit, he might hit, but either way, when you look at the profile of what he is, he's a freak athlete. He's 6'4", and he has dynamic skill. So they don't mind drafting that style of player. Milton Oscarson is the player they took out of a Rebro system the other year. I've watched him for a couple of years, 6'6", and he continues to grow. They took a Finn too. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He was a seventh rounder. He was 6'7". They don't mind drafting very unique unicorn style players. And if you look at what they have, like Connor Bedard ain't that big, right? Oliver Moore ain't that big. Lucas Reichel doesn't play a power game. Frank Nazar is small. Well, okay, they're definitely gonna draft big. Like we know there's no chance that they don't draft big, right? So when everybody says Ivan Demidov, I get it because Bedard and Demidov sounds like one of the most insane pairings of players you could ever imagine. I mean, on a power play, I can't even fathom what's going to happen. So I get it, but from a team building perspective, I really do lean towards something like a Cayden Lindstrom. But yeah, Lindstrom, like yeah, you took my quote, and that's it. That's the one for me. Is like I think people underestimate this player. I will say this though, he does remind me of Anton Silayev in terms of development curve. He was better at the start of the year, then he slowed down, then he got hurt. So the curve isn't in the right direction. But what I saw early in like October and November, like September, October, November, like he was just, there was way too much there. He was just had everything. He was a total package. When he's playing efficiently, he looks unstoppable. It's just towards that middle point of the season before it injured, he started, his efficiency rates went down, his playmaking rates went down, and then there was some susceptibility there. That's why I think some people started to sour a bit on him. But you just can't, if these players hit, they never get traded, literally never. Like the only chance you ever trade this player if he hits is if you get a bona fide, guaranteed prime #1 defenseman in return. That is literally the only way that he will ever be traded. So you have to, if you want him, you got to take him very high, right? And I know he's projected like what the consensus right now is around fifth. Like I don't know, it seems late to me, but again, we're a little biased. We have a second for a reason. Really like him. So yeah, he's an incredibly rare player. You just can't. He's very similar to Anton Silayev in terms of the top end, where it's like if you don't draft him now, you might never draft him. That's how rare they are.
Can't trade for guys like that anymore. It's just teams are not going to trade guys like that. So better draft them. Um, Speaking of not trading guys like that, our #1 ranked player from every ranking we have ever done in this draft class, Macklin Celebrini from Boston U. I mean, he's #1. What can we say about him? I mean, he's pretty much a perfect player. If you're going to build your your perfect player, he would look a lot like Macklin Celebrini. The skating is really good. Probably not an elite skater like McKinnon, McDavid. But the rest, my goodness, like the guy can really shoot the puck. He can really pass the puck. He makes player around him better. Competes hard. Like he competes. That's why there's a bit of a Jonathan Toews comparable going on with him, just as far as like overall two-way game, the compete level. But I think offensively he's a lot better than Jonathan Toews was in the NHL, which he was really good. Don't get me wrong, but most of his season were about between 65, 75 point season. I think Celebrini can do a lot more than that. And obviously hockey has changed a lot in the last 10 years. But less to like with Celebrini, honestly. There's no weakness with this player. It's pretty boring to talk about him, to be honest, because he's been #1 for us all year, and there's nothing really bad to say about him, Brad. So I'll let you try.
Well, I say like, what's the anomaly aspect of him? Like he's incredibly rounded. It's like that's not an anomaly. He's incredibly dynamic, but we've seen it before with #1s. Like he's not as gifted as Bedard, for instance, but he's close. He's incredibly talented. But I'll say there's a couple of weird things about him. One is I've never seen a defensive center that good at that age. I like since I've started doing this, I can't think of one. He's the best defensive center projection wise I've ever seen. Like he's just unbelievable in terms of his defensive presence for this age. The other factor is that he is stupidly gifted at one-arming pucks and one-arming players away from pucks when he is uh, uh, the puck with one hand. So like a lot of players have difficulty controlling the puck on their backhand when they have both hands. He can really manipulate a puck with just one arm and then drive and do things with that, and that really helps him extend possession in unique ways. He's incredibly gifted at remaining balanced, despite players attempting to throw him off balance. That is a very similar trait to what Crosby has. It's one of the reasons Sidney Crosby is Sidney Crosby. Celebrini has that trait as well. He's the absolute total package, though. Otherwise, I can't think of any faults. I can't think of. I mean, the only thing other I'd say I beat up on Adam Fantilli enough, not because I want to, but because the way the industry describes him. But like pound for pound, when you compare them against each other, like it's no contest to me. Like Celebrini is just miles ahead in terms of just the instincts on how to play the center position, and in terms of offensive hockey sense, it's not even remotely debatable. The last thing I'll say about this is that if you look at the #1s in recent drafts, I probably take him ahead of Jack Hughes. I take him ahead of Lafreniere. I take Bedard over him probably by a smidge. And like it's way closer than maybe people might think because yes, Bedard is going to score more. Yes, he's more productive. Yes, he's more creative, more dynamic. But when you look at Celebrini's elite 200-foot game, it really closes the gap. So that tells you just how good this player is. And to be honest with you, it's been great that we've had a situation where we haven't had to debate the number one and two because he did get difficult, and he at least allowed us a little bit of breather room because the drafts are really difficult to figure out after him. So that's all I'll say about Macklin.
Yeah, I mean it's back to back year where we have not really had any arguments about the number one overall pick, but I feel like last year there's at least some competition for Bedard with we absolutely love Leo Carlson. Um and Fantilli was in that mix, Michkov was in that mix. Um this year was not nobody was really in the mix. It was just Celebrini, and that was it. And speaking of that's it for us. Thank you for watching or listening. We just did our top 32 breakdown. It's split on two different episode on our YouTube channel or podcast channel if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Again, thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you to Brad for spending time with me today, and then we have one more podcast coming up. I believe will be our Q&A, which people ask us questions. So we'll be back, and Mark will join us for that one. And that's it. Have a good one, guys.